Welcome to AI FISEC Today, the physical security industry's first podcast dedicated to uncovering the mysteries and opportunities around AI. I'm your host, Don Marone, and I'm really excited for this episode's guest, where we talk about agents versus agency. Meet Michael Skelly, who's the CEO and co-founder of Stacker AI, a platform that allows businesses to power their operations through AI agents. He has degrees in computer science from Oxford University and Imperial College London. He was a multiple-time startup CTO before founding Stacker. Now, let's jump into the conversation with Michael to learn more about agents versus agency. Hey, welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Hey, great to be here, Don.
I'm really excited about the topic that we have and want to get to your background so the audience has a good context to who you are, how you got here. But for those that don't know Michael Skelly, he's the founder of Stacker AI. He's definitely built with a ton of grit. He has to. It's the only way that he could live through it. Today's topic will cover agents versus agency.
Yeah, so I actually got into this space having spent a bunch of time working for a asset management company in London, a very kind of middle of the road, mediocre organization. And I met my co-founder there, and we were deploying Salesforce as a solution. And not really for the sales team, but we were using that as a kind of springboard to build all this like fantastic software for all the weird parts of the organization that like there isn't good off-the-shelf software for asset managers. And these people had just basically decided, well, we're never going to get good software. Maybe we'll stick with spreadsheets or something. And so we built stuff using the Salesforce platform. But eventually we were like, well, if only there was a way that these people could build this stuff themselves. And so we spent from about 2017 to maybe around last year building a no-code platform. So kind of, I'd say the wave before AI helping build stuff for you was business people could build stuff themselves. And so built that out, and that's a fantastic product that people can use to move away from spreadsheets for their human-based work. But what we found more and more was that people, as AI was starting to become available, people were starting to say, well, do I still need to be doing this work? This work, which is kind of not strategic, it's low value, it's manual, it's boring. Can I not just get a computer to do it? And finally, the answer has become yes. So Stacker as it is today is actually a platform for you to take the work that your team is doing and give it to an agent. But also, we've still got that history of being a no-code platform, so you can still create the kind of environment in which the agent and your team can work side by side. So it really is bringing in these agents as teammates.
I love having Michael on because he's one of our first guests that comes from the AI community, right? I think you've got some really awesome investments and some great catalysts that's really helped Stack. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're really lucky to have been supported really from the early days by some fantastic names. I mean, all the way from we got a first kind of UK-based investor called Pentech, but from there we went to Y Combinator, which is I'd say like the big preeminent startup accelerator, and there we've had both Initialized Capital and Andreessen Horowitz, and between them they've got pretty much all the big names under their belt. And yeah, it's really great to have support from people who can see far off into the future, because I think often we've been just in front of the big wave of any one of these technologies. So yeah, not everyone's always on board with them until they show their value. And it's great to find investors who are willing to take that jump.
And and for anyone in the audience that don't know those names, those are companies that invest into top tech organizations in the world, like Lyft and Uber and Airbnb, etc. So what Michael's accomplished is huge. And I think one of the other reasons I'm super pumped to have him on the call, because he's going to have a share perspective that you're not going to get often within the security industry. And I think it's good that he had mentioned that just for context. So to give Michael more clout, because he definitely deserves it. So let's jump in, man. So this agent versus agency conversation. So what would you say defines an AI agent, and how does it differ from traditional automation tools?
So firstly, I think the term AI agent and agentic AI came up partly as a way to differentiate from generative AI. It's still
Right.
the same kind of technology,
Right.
but the difference is that generative AI is just spitting out text, and that can be really useful to you. You can brainstorm with it, or it can generate images, things like that. But agentic AI, the first thing it does is it takes actions. And this, I think, was a genius idea to get the AI basically to describe to a different different part of the system what actions it would like to take as part of the text it was generating. And then that part of the system goes off and does it, reports back, and then the AI can choose to do more things. Firstly, I think the big difference between agentic AI and generative AI is this: it's out in the world and it's taking actions. So that's the kind of the first big difference. But I think as this has become more of a embedded as a technology, I think we're starting to see that there is almost a spectrum of use cases here, and what people think of as agentic AI, I think can sit on somewhere from this is just like a normal workflow, a normal kind of when this happens, do this, with some LLM kind of reasoning steps in it. So maybe it's a new lead comes in and you want the AI to categorize, is this a big lead or a small lead? Does it seem like a big opportunity or not? And then on one, you're going to send an email sequence, the other, you're going to route to your sales team. So a little bit of AI, and that triggers some actions, but it is still just basically a normal automation. And then we go all the way across the other side of the spectrum, which is what I'd call autonomous agents, where we have an AI and it is not just doing things, but it is off on its own. It has a goal and it will basically continue doing things regardless of, it doesn't need to wait for someone to get back to it. It also doesn't need to wait to be triggered. It's got a mission and it's going to fulfill that mission. And then in between, we've got all sorts of different states where maybe there's a human partly involved and they're working alongside the AI, a kind of a co-pilot kind of setup. Or maybe there's more agentic workflows where it is still triggered by something at the start, but there's more decision points for the agent to make. They might kind of review a document, then think a bit, review another document if they need to, and then finally make a decision and move on. So we've got this kind of spectrum, and everyone is calling it agentic AI, and I think that's a good term for it, but it encompasses a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, there seems to be differences of opinions on what agents are, right? Like there's, and I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a spectrum because people can't agree. If it gives, it's almost like what makes, what are the characteristics of something? Well, if it ticks the boxes, or at least most of the boxes, then it could have the characteristics of the thing, but maybe not 100%. Like when we say agentic, to me is like a description or describing agent behavior, right? And like the automation stuff, business process automation been around for a long time. It's like Boolean logic. If this happens.
Yeah.
And so the agent, as you mentioned, could have some autonomy in deciding how that workflow goes based on the outcome that it wants to achieve. But yeah, I've seen it where Microsoft defines it as like retrieval, like in its most simple form, it just retrieves content, and then the other side of the spectrum, like you mentioned, it's autonomous, and there's everything in between. It really just depends on what problem we're trying to solve and on what makes sense. But I know if I go into the full AI community, they would say, the AI engineers would say, a real agent, I give it a goal and it just goes and does it. And I'm like, yeah, yes, okay, fair, right? But at the same time, there's got to be some sort of like guardrails and understanding for that process, because it's like we have an employee that always gets it done, but we never really know how it does that. That's just a
Yeah.
weird, they don't manage our team people like that. I don't think we'll manage the technology like that either, but we'll see. So thanks for that. So I did want to ask a follow up on that one then. So how does the the concept of agency, think about the philosophy around agency, relate to AI agents?
Yeah, and I think if you're going to ask the strict definition from the AI community, then I do think agency is where we start to differentiate between maybe intelligent workflows, AI infused workflows, and true agents. And I think it is this: it's agency, it's the ability to choose and then enact that decision as part of a workflow. And I think once you start thinking about it like that, actually you realize that there are some people doing jobs where they don't have agency. So some people, they are just picking up a piece of paper, reading the numbers on it, and then keying something into a computer, go. And they might make some judgments as part of that, but there's no part of the sequence of events that are going to be any different. There might be just a different number they press at the end, something like that. And compare that to, lots of people in their jobs actually, they don't have one particular task they're meant to do, but they have a goal they're meant to achieve, and they've got a known set of things they could do. They could email the marketing team to ask for assets. They could contact a news agency and put out a press release. Lots of different things that they could do. Many of them may look very similar. They may be sending emails or whatever, but there is no flowchart for what does it take for you to get to that goal. And I think that is the full extent of agency, where it's kind of like any tool at your disposal. And then I think there's a middle ground, and something like a claims handler would be something like this, where they have this kind of task queue of stuff they need to get done. But as part of that, they might need to investigate different things. They might need to pull data from different systems. They might need to request some information from whoever made the claim. Eventually, they will satisfy themselves, yes, now this is good, and I'm going to move it on. So again, they've got the agency, but it's bounded agency. Whereas generally, a lot of people have unbounded agency, or within practical limits, unbounded agency of what they could do. And so it's just down to them to get the work done.
Yes, this concept of agency, you made a really good analogy there. It's like there are some jobs that people have today that don't have agency at all, right? They're literally just taking these processes and moving them along. And one of the things that I've seen when we think about the problem that an agent solves, like what are the symptoms of the problem, to me is that it's a repetitive, mundane task. If I can logically see the workflow and there's no agency in that workflow, then those jobs are at risk, like clerical, administrative. But then,
Yeah.
and I think it's not a bad thing. I mean, it's just an industrial revolution. So I think those people in those jobs really have to start thinking about what they can do to get jobs that have more agency. 'Cause I never thought about
Yeah.
it that way, that using the agency and bringing it to the people that, there are plenty of jobs that don't even have agency right now.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's a big difference even for people that are making workflows that cover these kind of things. The impetus when you have a thing which is an agent is that responsibility for getting the stuff done is with the agent. And so even if their work is almost always routine and mundane, if there's some weird exception, like they open the file and it's blank, then they will flag that. It will be up to them to resolve that, to make sure that is circulated and make sure that they can move on. Whereas if it is just a mechanical workflow, then it's up to the workflow designer to have worked out all the eventualities. Every single possible thing needs to be accounted for, or the workflow breaks down. And I think that kind of like whether there is a not a mind, but a process focusing on this is the goal and I'm going to move this forward to the goal, or whether we are looking for a system, and that could be a system of humans or a system of LLMs or even just normal automation, but the system has no idea about what it's trying to achieve. The system is just doing the things. That, again, I think is where there is no agency. And that is really all on the workflow designer to have done that perfectly.
Yeah, this conversation reminds me that I should probably pick up the guy who's a founder of LinkedIn. He wrote a book on agency. I know you've heard about that, but I feel like I'm going to pick that up now because as you're talking,
Interesting.
it's starting to open up my curiosity around like agency means much more than I thought that it did, or could mean philosophy, concept wise, much more than I thought it might have. And so, then thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about current capabilities and limitations of AI agents in 2025. What are, from your perspective, current capabilities and limitations of AI agents right now?
So right now, I think there's actually one pretty good way to quickly get a feeling for what an AI agent can and can't do, and that's to think of it as an intern, a fresh, straight out of college intern. And they've been to some fantastic colleges. They've done like an MBA, they've done a medical degree, they've done accountancy qualifications. They've done a lot of stuff, but they've never applied it in the real world. So they've got no experience in how to do any particular task, but they've got all the book smarts about it. They're very enthusiastic, but they don't learn. Every day you get this fresh set of interns in with all their book smarts, and the only thing which helps them do the task right is how well you can describe that task. Now, they can use judgment as part of that. They are interns, so they can use kind of human like judgment, but there needs to be a process for them to follow. And the clearer that process, the more likely they are to follow it. However, they are also slightly drunk. And so they'll make decisions that are sometimes baffling for humans. So, more than just kind of the human level of accidents, copying numbers, sometimes they'll make quite weird calls. And it's hard to predict because they're drunk. But other than that, they are, as I say, bright, very knowledgeable, and willing to work tirelessly. But you need to have clear instructions and you need to have the guardrails for when they do both the expected errors and the unexpected errors.
So you're telling me when you started as an intern, you didn't drink on the job?
Well,
I thought that was
started
normal.
started in the finance world in London where there's a lot of drinking.
Nice. So let's talk about something you mentioned there. So you said that they're like a fresh new set of interns, so they don't remember. I know that memory is a challenge with agents, but do you find, why is that? Like, why is it, I mean, is it because of like, for example, if I need to remember what's in a chat window, that seems something I understand. I know that we can definitely do. But is it because of the agent crosses different tools and knowledge bases, and for it to be able to incorporate that knowledge into a place where it can continue to learn from what we call in the AI space is there's some sort of data flywheel, but there has to be a depository of the data for it to learn from, I guess. It's a flywheel for the audience is just, it's just a place where the agent can do self-reinforcement learning so it gets better over time based on how it's used and the memory. Maybe tell us a little, is the problem the memory, and why is memory a problem in the current state,
So
if not?
right now, the way that almost all AI systems work is that we have these models that we're getting from Gemini,
Hmm.
ChatGPT, Grok, and they are the foundation models. And then people are using those models to do things. And so the agent will be powered by one or maybe more of those models. And so there's a difference between what the model kind of knows, and that is the things that I'd say it knows kind of intuitively. And a really great way to think about LLMs and AI models is that everything it does is intuition. It's just kind of like gut reaction, bam. And that's why it's not that great at maths, because it's just gut reaction, bam. But it's why it is so good at lots of other things that are a bit more judgment based. And right now, it's not easy to add additional information into that model's intuition and for its gut reaction. So the models don't learn per se. And we're starting to get the first kind of models where you are able to add additional information to it, which kind of gets baked into the model. And that to me is a little bit like this is an intern that has done day one and has come back the next day. And they've slept on it. And so they've incorporated what happened in. That's only just starting, and almost that is really not being used at all yet. But I think the foundational companies are going to start introducing that more, and then that will start coming. But right now, it is pretty much like they go to bed, they wake up, and they haven't remembered anything. So that's kind of like in terms of learning. Now, what they can do while they're on the job is access information and keep it in their heads like while they're doing a task. And that is a kind of like that's like conversation that you might have with ChatGPT. It can remember what's happening, and it can also store some of that either formally in databases and things, but also in a more informal way. And ChatGPT, for example, has a memory feature where as you speak to it, it will synthesize little bits and facts about you and store them somewhere. But that isn't actually ChatGPT knows you, because the next time you chat with ChatGPT, it's a completely fresh one that knows nothing about you. But the previous one had left a primer sheet. It's written down, okay, Don really likes talking with funny, elaborate metaphors. Great, okay, I'll remember that when I do this next conversation with him. But it doesn't actually know you. I think eventually we will get to the point where we have these personalized AIs that do know you. It is baked into their intuition. And similarly, for within business context, we have AIs that have experience in doing claims processing or document audit or whatever it is. And they have some of that baked in, and you don't need to fully instruct them on everything. But right now, yeah, it's everything is at the level of here are some instructions, and if I want to have a kind of self reinforcing loop, then most likely what I'll do is be editing my own instructions. So I will use what I'm seeing and getting to make my own instructions better. And that's kind of like asking your intern to say, hey, before you go today, reflect on where these instructions could have been clearer so that whoever comes in tomorrow will do a better job.
So there are some capabilities of, let's call it, memory enhancement, but it needs a lot of work still. It's in order to make it more useful than just starting fresh every day. It sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got some kind of band-aid techniques right now, and we've got, I think, some fundamental versions of that coming in the future, but that's definitely not mainstream yet.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. So to back it up for the audience on the security industry side, Michael, we have several, let's call it, personas in the industry between manufacturers that make the technology like security cameras, electronic door access control, use a key fob, get no door, intrusion systems, so an alarm goes off in your house, like those kinds of things. Those manufacturers. Then you have security integrators that install and service those systems. So right, these are like blue collar companies that go put the stuff in and service it. And then you have end users that are the ones that use it. Now, we also have consultants in the space, but primarily it's end users, manufacturers, and integrators that are most heavily involved. And so, but end users and integrators are just consuming what the manufacturers basically make, right? Maybe the integrators do some tweaks when they do the installations, but fundamentally, manufacturers are
Yeah.
making them. So the onus on memory and capabilities and limitations is them. But what we found is that the industry tends to lack, several years behind the IT space, which I would encompass as the AI community, same thing. And some of that, it will be interesting to see how they shape up because it's not so much of just getting an agent, it's much less like how are we also experimenting with, do we understand the current capabilities and limitations? Much less are they even modernized? A lot of these systems are on-prem and use what looks like Windows 98 kind of software in some cases,
Yeah.
so I know that's of interest to them and that they're listening. And I think, and if you had a recommendation for them, like maybe where to start, if they were looking into agents, let's say if you're a manufacturer, like, did you maybe have any high level advice? Just a high level advice.
Yeah, I think the analogy kind of continues over here, which is I always get companies to think if you could, often it's if you could hire for any one of your teams an assistant, an intern who would just do the stuff, or in this case, it might be if you could ship with any one of your products, someone who is going to be the attendant, and that might be for getting it set up, or that literally could be for the day to day. If it's a video feed, what would you do if you could ship with every single product you sold, someone who was watching that feed and using human-based intelligence to make some decisions? I think the set of possibilities is huge.
Yeah, a good point. So let's go on to companies like Stacker AI. So how are companies like yours implementing AI agents to enhance operations? So maybe we can talk about some practicality. Like, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two flavors of use cases that we're seeing happening. The first is that, as we said before, agents means a lot of stuff to a lot of people, and I think for a big set of people who aren't deeply in the community, it's actually a bit of a just a breath of fresh air of potential that, hey, there's all this stuff in my job that is just like, I hate it. I hate tapping this from this system to this system. And agents are, I think, a little bit of both an understandability vehicle. That there's something that people can start to kind of figure like, okay, this is like having a robot or an AI or something doing stuff for me. And I think it's also, there's now just exciting new promise that has meant that there's a lot of stuff where it's kind of somewhere between really is just normal automation, or it's kind of normal automation, but with the extra bit that made it hard to automate in the past. Maybe that's because it has to go into the email or it needs to read some documents or whatever it is. That can now be done. So one of the big categories of use case I'm seeing is just huge numbers of small use cases that are really for people speeding up little parts of their daily work, or it's even like taking the stones out of your shoes, the things that have been really irritating you for a long time. They don't stop you doing your job, but they make it much, much more irritating. So that is the first category. And I think also people are quite happy with those things because they're all like little snippets of someone's jobs, and no one's thinking like, wow, this is going to replace us. So there's a kind of big open arms for those things, and there's lots and lots of those opportunities. The second category, I think, is where what you're making is a meaningful and often revolutionary change to some role or job that needs to be done in an organization. And this is often unlocked by some of the specific capabilities we talked about just there, of that they can go into emails, that they can read documents, that they can access systems. But critically, there's also this kind of higher level agentic thinking where the AI is able to kind of reason in a way that could never have been previously encoded in rules and systems. And there, I think what we're able to do is really transform the way that people's jobs run. And often, I think the common thought there is like, oh, that's going to be, we just like eliminate huge teams. Nearly always what I'm seeing is that actually what it means is that we take 40% of someone's role and say that boring stuff where you were literally just tapping stuff into a key into a screen, or you were just fielding emails back and forth all day. It wasn't high value, but you had to do it. That is now freed up, and your role is now to do the other half of your previous job, which was the strategic work that you didn't get time to do, and there's some amount of supervising and helping this AI that is working alongside you. And I think we're seeing this in anything from things like processing transactional documents, people who receive invoices or orders and need to do a bit of understanding and making judgments, but also do need to just take the email, put it in the system. People who are handling cases, so they've got some work that comes through. There's lots of different steps as part of that job. Some of them are going to be really boring and manual. Some of them might require a bit more judgment. And a couple of them are going to be the real critical ones. And for those run-of-the-mill ones get pushed through automatically. What the team's left with is the really interesting ones that need the strategic human thought. And then I think that there's lots of stuff which is around either reading or producing documents. I mean, people are producing huge amounts of stuff that they're sending to other people who are then reading them and then probably making some other decisions. So anything from writing proposals to send to other companies, reviewing contracts that come in, filling out questionnaires for security, IT security questionnaires, for example. Lots and lots of this knowledge being passed back and forth between companies in verbal format, in the written word, that is now being handed across to AIs as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, you said something that stuck out to me amongst there's a lot of good things you said there, but I'll take one. So where it's like, and I'm paraphrasing, but where it's like really painful. Like one of my favorite things to solve is that meaning they just when they think about it, they get upset, you know? So when I work with owners to build agents, and I'm like, hey, just you know what it is. Just if you don't know, go over the next week or two and just write it down as it comes up. But I promise you within a couple days you'll probably know what it is because it's something you deal with every day that is just annoying to you and it's repetitive. And because what I feel is that where I'm helping a lot, maybe you feel your team feels this way, is when that customer feels like I absolutely can't stand this thing, you know? And oftentimes because they know that it is just punching keys and they're like they
Yeah.
feel diluted intellectually as a result of that, right? Like as a seller, and sales leader that I've been in prior roles to becoming a founder, I know exactly how that feels, right? So like if you're constantly doing outreach and it's like the same thing over and over, but then you're also so basically if you don't have an SDR team and you're doing outreach plus you're doing your discovery, an enterprise discovery at that, you got to go from mind numbing to like IQ, and that is a huge gap. And doing more of this starts to reduce the ability to do this because what we want to do, the more shots at bat or opportunities we can get to do higher intellectual things, we will become smarter, right? But if I'm spending time making myself not exercising my brain, it's like the difference between if I go to the gym and I'm literally saying, well, I want to progressively increase my weight, the weights that I use, I'm going to get stronger. But if I'm going in and I'm constantly lifting 10 pounds, I might get leaner, but I will never grow muscle mass. I'm never growing from that, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the business that we're in that we share is helping people grow that intellectual muscle and that professional muscle to become better workers, people that contribute more than just doing the clerical mundane. So good stuff, man. Good stuff. So let's talk a little bit about ethical stuff, ethical considerations that arise when deploying these autonomous agents. So it's easy when it's not autonomous because it's like, well, a human's dealing with it, so the human has to decide. But when they are autonomous, what have you seen to be some of the ethical considerations that arise?
Yeah, and I think there's like two categories of these. One is certainly as this kind of rolls through and we need fewer people working on these things, there is going to be job loss, and we don't know where that is going to head. But I think probably the kind of the more practical one, the one that we can kind of look at more now and less just as a society is where is there harm potential for these AIs and being out there? And I think the one of the quick ones that lots of people come up and think, okay, here's an opportunity, because nearly every company does this, is hiring. You put out a job ad, you get a whole bunch of CVs in. CVs are not that exciting, but they contain the information you need to make decisions. So can you have an AI go through and decide who you should bring to interview, and then you kind of move into the human side of it. And I think this is one of those great setups where there is a real potential for harm here. Firstly, because the AI has all sorts of biases, and there'll be biases on the normal things that we're used to. Um, there'll also be biases on things probably that we've never even thought about. AIs will have biases based on the fonts that they use, potentially, or different sentence structure. And some of those could be what you want to be making hiring decisions on, but some of them might not be. And so the first problem is that the employer is not going to necessarily get the hiring outcomes that they want because they've got this AI choosing on things that they don't care about. I think the second, more pernicious thing is that is going to radically impact the kind of people who hit those biases disproportionately as more and more and more organizations start using this. That is going to hit them. And so they're going to be affected. And then probably, if we let this go unchecked, probably then, let's say for a chief security officer, let's say the AI is going to hire fewer women. Well, that's going to get even worse because if everyone starts using AI to screen their CVs, then next round of training set data we get, we're going to have fewer women in those roles. And so the AI's training data is going to be like, okay, men seem to be more in these roles. And so therefore, it's going to be making more decisions to hire the men, which means it's going to be thinking, we've got even more men. And so that is the self-perpetuating loop. So I think any time where there is, firstly, a decision being made and the AI doesn't have to state its criteria and isn't scoring based on criteria that you want it to be explicit about, there is a risk for bad outcomes for everyone involved, for the company and for anyone who's being covered. And then secondly, I think where there is a systemic use of these kind of things, there's a real risk for society as a whole to get much, much worse outcomes for certain groups, and then compounding that across all society. So I think there's some real difficult things going on in there. And it's not to say humans aren't also capable of bias, but I think we are probably more aware that humans are flawed in that way, and maybe less so thinking about AI because it's a product of what it's read, nothing more, nothing less.
You said something there that I'll just get the comment out because I think about this, and it's, well, one, it's my podcast, so I guess I could say this, but I don't want to offend anyone. I mean, my thought is around ethical stuff, and like hiring in that example is that, one could say that DEI by itself is biased. If I'm looking for, someone of a particular race or gender, and then I'm giving AI that instruction, by nature that's biased. But we say it's not biased because we need to have, a certain distribution of genders. And so that's obviously a totally different topic for a different day, but it does bring up a question of, will that continue with the AI, and what will the AI do in the future? Will it learn from those things over time and go ahead and decide when, it should overlook, a male for a female, or this color versus that color at some point, even when the organization doesn't want it to? And so I'm just saying what could lead, meaning that our bias, right? I don't want to say it's necessarily a bad thing if it's contributing to diversity. I'm just saying, but there is a bias there. If I'm saying I'm picking someone because of the color of the skin or the gender, I have a bias for that when I hire. But I do wonder what the implications will be at some point when the agent has autonomy, right, to make decisions beyond just saying, okay, for this job description, we need to do this, meaning that the agent might be already see in metrics to say, here's our diversity distribution, and every time we set a new hire, I'm going to go ahead and send it out. But that might be, but then it needs to understand for particular roles, what region. The US is and the UK, very diverse, right? But there's other places in the world, if I need to hire internationally, that are not necessarily that diverse. And so the complexities there will be interesting to see how those ethical considerations will be solved. But probably more so for like larger companies that have to think about that. But that's an interesting point you
Yeah,
made.
and I think that the weird thing is that this can happen regardless of whether you firstly tell the agent to do it or not. So
Mhm.
you might say, I just want you to find the best candidate for the job, but the AI just has, it's just got the world's information around it, and it's going to use whatever signals it might find appropriate there. And the second thing is that even if you take out certain signals that seem obvious, these AI are very, very clever, and they can, you might remove gender from an application form, but there are other ways that can be signaled in how people write. And I think that this is true on kind of like ethical questions around hiring and things like that. But I think it's also true for things like applying for loans and things. And your company as a policy might be say like, actually, we are completely happy for people with a criminal background, for example. Maybe that is, you've got that built into your calculation somewhere else. But the AI might still be not even looking for evidence of that, but just correlations with that to say, I know that based in the kind of the general discourse that this part of town is a high crime area. And so I'm going to recommend we don't accept this candidate for a loan, even though all the financials might work out. So I think that the main thing you've got to think is you're putting this in the hands of random interns, and you need to make sure that you are supervising them as interns, not like a infallible computer system. Because they are picking up on random signals that you've not thought of. They are making assumptions about what you might want. And unless you're really, really clear on what sort of things you want it to be doing, it will be making its own choices. And you wouldn't eventually let the future of your company be decided by the random choices of an intern.
I appreciate that segment on ethics. That's one of the few times that I've had a deeper conversation around ethics with the AI pro. So I think that was good content. Thank you, Michael. So let's get back to the agency stuff. So how does the integration of AI agents impact human agency in decision making? So what are your thoughts?
I think that the reality is overall it is going to greatly increase human agency, just in the same way that a bicycle greatly increases the range over which you can travel. And I think that the main way that this happens is that when you are freed up to not do all of the micro parts of executing something, you can spend a lot more time thinking what to execute, but also you can try things much more quickly. You can set something going and then go and have a different thought, different approach. Like, for example, if I'm researching companies, I will probably send a kind of deep research agent off on one particular angle, and then I'll have a bit of a think and come up with two or three other angles and send some more agents off. And so that's not just that I'm getting that work done more quickly. If I was doing this myself, I would probably just do the first one, my kind of like my high likelihood one. But as soon as I am now freed up from the execution, I can firstly have that thought, and I can go and do some of the things which might be like higher variance, but still with high payoff potential. So I can explore those unusual avenues. I think the same is true on more processized things. So, for example, in these kind of claim checking, maybe it's an insurance claim writer, if they are currently spending 10 minutes of their allocated 12 minutes on their claim adjusting, just getting the information from the system, opening photos, checking everything's there, well, they are probably not going to be thinking like, what's the chance that this is an unusual scam? Or what's the chance that we're missing a piece of evidence which I could just go and request and come back through? I think the agency increases as people move to a higher level and move towards either these kind of like more flexible and roles where there's more judgment involved, or actually move up to the strategic level of saying, how should we be thinking about this process overall? And the agents are the ones that do the process. So people move kind of fully out of being process executors and just become process designers, analyzers, and supervisors.
So humans get more agency, which is a good thing. That's what
I
we
think
all
so.
want, right? Is to have that ability to make tough decisions, make complicated decisions, so we all rise to the occasion. So appreciate that. Let's go into how AI agents are influencing job roles and employment trends. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously a whole set of roles that are particularly like obviously worried about what they're going to do. So like things like data entry roles. But I think we're already starting, probably sooner than I expected, to see much more highly skilled non-entry level jobs are also going to be affected. And software engineers, believe it or not, I think are going to be the first. And we're already seeing the graphs kind of for the second half of 2024 and certainly the first half of 2025, hiring in software engineering roles has gone down dramatically. And that's because now a single software engineer can do a hell of a lot more than they used to be able to, because they've got this kind of additional clout. They've got a bicycle, they can go further. And I think really any role where what you have is knowledge work and where there is a decent amount that is just kind of put your headphones on, just get it done kind of thing. So you're not doing the strategic thinking. I think there are going to be massive changes to that. On the flip side, probably that will mean that there are more of those roles happening at that higher level, but that is going to be like a long turnaround to making that adjustment. So there's going to be, I think, all the way from first job out of college, entry level, all the way up. There are going to be huge changes.
Yeah, and I definitely see some concerns with, kids coming out of college, how to where they start. I could see that there's a lot of advantages for people that are already working that can shift into this. So I wonder how do you think like a college kid would bridge the gap in their employment? And if it's too loaded of a question, let me know. But I am curious, like, do you ever give this any thought? How they might be bridge the gap between college to being a working professional when the entry level jobs, the intern jobs, these agents can take on, well, maybe a great deal of that.
Yeah, I honestly have no idea, and I think it's a real question for how are we going to get the next generation of people who understand what it is like to do these jobs, so therefore they can make decisions and either manage a team of people or most likely in the future, often a team of agents. How are we going to get those people, and how are we going to get people who need to learn what it is like to operate in a working environment? They need to learn from their peers and their managers and things. If very quickly that structure is just some supervising humans and some agents, I really don't know. And I think that is going to be a real kind of second wave reckoning. The first wave, I think, is for us to deal with what happens from the people who already understand the work being displaced. But at least then we have a set of people who already understand how this was done in the past and can kind of move upwards. But yeah, how do we get these people to kind of almost jump that first level and to get to the point where they understand whatever industry they're in without having to have done the boring but often useful grind of doing those kind of entry level jobs.
Yeah, I just thought of it. That's a good point. I think so. Good, decent spot for existing workers. Weird spot if you're coming out of college, let's say. But the way I think about it, it's probably on the education institutions to figure that out, right? They take traditional education, as it were, and into this new thing, and how fast they can evolve a curriculum. Like when I got my MBA, I had a marketing professor, brilliant guy, but I'm pretty sure he was using the same deck from the 90s. And so meaning like it's easy to be professional when your thing doesn't change for a decade, but come into
Yeah.
the AI space and it's changing like every 3 to 6 months. There's something that could impact direction and focus probably faster than that, but that's a different story. And
And I think the
so,
question the
yeah.
question is going to be not what job is going to persist. Some of them will. If you're a nurse, then you're going to be a nurse, or a human dealing with other humans in the physical world. I think in general for cross knowledge work, it's really not thinking what jobs will exist, but just what are the new jobs that are going to come about. When we got word processors, we lost those massive typing pools. And what happened? Well, actually, we just then now we have a huge number of roles that just completely never existed back then. There were no digital marketing managers back in the time when we had typing pools. But I'm sure a lot of the people who could have done that are now doing this. So there's going to be a change, and that's the same change that happened back when we stopped having to operate looms by hand because we got the steam engine. The roles will mutate, and I don't think we're going to have a load of kind of general unemployment going on, and we're all going to have to adapt to a life of leisure any more than the fact that we suddenly have, back in the days of the steam engine, basically all mechanical work could be done automatically. Didn't mean that we all could just spend all our time laying in the grass and watching the sun. We're humans. We find new problems that we want to solve, and then apply people to doing it.
I mean, Steve Jobs laid in the grass and watched the sun, but he was also on drugs when he thought about some great Apple ideas. So, there's always that if you decide to lay in the grass and look at the sun.
Absolutely.
So let me shift into more what's happening with the tech, right? So think about multi-agent systems. So we talk about, okay, here's what an agent does. But what have you seen around in advancements that are being made with regards to multi-agents systems? So more than one agent system. What advancements have you seen?
Yeah, and I think that there's a bit of probably a divergence here between probably the common understanding of what you might think of as an agent, which is like, okay, an agent is approximately like someone doing someone's job, like an AI construct that will do a job. Whereas actually, often in these multi-agent systems, each part is almost like a way of thinking. And you, while doing a job, so maybe you want to research some companies and then send some marketing emails to those companies, you probably go through different modes of thinking. So one part you're doing some research kind of tasks, and once you get them, you might do a time where you scan through the list and pull out any bad ones. Then you might be going through and thinking, what's my personalization for each of these? And then eventually you say, okay, great, now I'm going to write an email for each of them. And that's kind of one job that you're doing, but you're taking on different frames of mind while you're doing it. And that is kind of how a multi-agent system works. In that kind of setup, you'd have one agent which is just finding potential companies, another one which is evaluating are they a good fit, another one which is working out for the good fits what personalization needs doing, another which is writing the email. And so each of those kind of gets named as an agent, unless you were in a very, very large organization. Most likely they wouldn't exist as separate job roles, but instead are different ways that a single person would work. And so right now, I think multi-agent systems are our way of having agents that can have that they can have a different set of instructions, and they can almost be trained how to do tasks differently. And I don't know where this is going to go. I think we find in general that can start to get a bit confusing for people. It's sometimes easier to think of just a single agent, and that agent just has they've got a little booklet of, all right, if you're finding leads, here's how you do it. Cool. If you're evaluating leads, here's how you do it. And then the agent will just use the instructions as appropriate at different times. But certainly multi-agent systems are ways that, I don't know if you see people on LinkedIn who say they've got this kind of 50 agents that run your business. That is the way it is done right now. And I think that's because if you try to tell one agent, here's everything, it'll just get confused, just as if you gave one intern a big sheet of paper with every single role in your organization. But the reality of it is probably a little more fine-grained than you think, and most likely it's actually just one or two overall functions being done, but broken down into a way that the machines can understand.
Yeah, I agree. I love how you say that because there's an aspect where, hey, this is the real sausage making that's happening, but people just want the sausage, right? I just need it to do this thing for me. No, I don't care if there's like five of them agents that are doing it to make it happen. Just go do it, you know? Because I had started when I had started my agency to think about, here's an architecture and the way Microsoft puts it is there's three levels of agents that there's a utility agent, then there's a super agent, and then an orchestrator agent. And so the utility agents are like super focused on doing one thing really well. Otherwise, because you got to give them guardrails, you give them a limited knowledge base, whatever, because otherwise they'll hallucinate, make mistakes. And then you got a super agent that manages a domain or call it a department of utility agents. So I got my super agents that's in a sales super agent. That sales super agent might manage those group of sales utility agents that one updates a CRM and one go gets leads or whatever. And then above them is an orchestrator agent, which manages all super agents and therefore all
Yeah.
utility. I find that that's, if they're just fully autonomous, so they're taking no user input, I don't know how that becomes valuable. But I do know that certainly if it's one that is a retrieval or task-based agent that a person has to interact with, and that does become valuable. Because otherwise, I don't want to talk to these like five different agents. I might want to talk to the one agent that can go retrieve or do my tasks on my command. But for the autonomous ones, I don't know. I don't know how that works. I mean, if they're just working in the background, then it's like, why do I need to have them in this sophisticated orchestration? That I don't see the point. Maybe it's memory. Maybe they learn better together somehow. If I've got sales utility agents over here, marketing utility agents over here, is it valuable that they both kind of understand what they're doing? So maybe there's a value chain there.
Yeah, so sometimes it's for ease of people to think about, and just so you can
Mhm.
split it up. And sometimes it's even so that you can tell how well your agent's doing without having to look at the overall part, but you can just look at a small part and saying, how well is it doing at writing personalization things, rather than saying, looking end to end and saying, like, how well is it doing at capturing leads? Because there might be multiple factors that go into that. And as you change the agent, you'd like to be able to say, well, I've changed something over here, but I want my bit that does personalization that shouldn't have changed. So I don't need to thoroughly retest that. That one was good. Now my way of sourcing new leads, that's changed. So there is some benefits to it, but overall I do think the Microsoft terminology is, as always, quite developer focused. We find folks just find it easier to think of agents like people. So we call all these sub agents, we just call them skills. Skills that you can teach to this kind of coworker, and if you teach them a skill, it knows how to do a thing. That I think gives, again, 90% of the intuition correctly. That extra 10% really only matters once you get like really in depth on it.
Yeah, Michael, that makes a ton of sense. Thank you for that. So I want to learn more about how reinforcement learning plays in the development of agents. Like I talked about earlier around the data flywheel, because it's like one thing when they just kind of do, but it's another thing that they get better over time in some way, because it's like I want to hire an intern, but I really would rather not teach that intern every day, like what to do. Or in this case, it's pulling from a knowledge base and tools at the time of inference, and it's just kind of figure it out. And I think that creates issues with regards to results. My results are always different or slightly different, then that can create some inconsistencies. And so I feel like there's something around this self reinforcement play. I would love to get your take on what you've seen, maybe in your own technology stack, right? Or just in what the AI community has been working on, the role of reinforcement learning, how does it play in the development of AI agents?
Yeah, and so reinforcement learning is certainly, by its true definition, is used mainly in the kind of creation of these foundational models. I'd say kind of creation and tuning of these foundational models. And so it is more in the agent developing more intuition than it is in the agent kind of getting its own instructions better. And the way it kind of works within these foundational models built by Google and OpenAI and Anthropic is the first half of the agent's learning is more like kind of what you might learn in school. So it is taking information and learning to regurgitate it in some way. And like, the way it does that is getting large bodies of text, and it is given the first half, and it kind of has to learn how to complete the second half, having only seen the first half, having never seen the second half. So it's not a memorization so much as it is taking the patterns it's seen in the past and reapplying them. So in that mode, it's really just kind of taking the data that's already there and being able to fully reproduce all of that. But none of that data was an agent or even a generative kind of conversational chat AI. That is nearly all just text, books, movies, all sorts. So the second half is we want it to not just be able to know the information that's in there, but we actually care about what is that like when it's doing the job it's doing. And we'll take the kind of easy example of chatting with a user. So it can give something that is a completely true answer, something that is supported by all the patterns it's seen in the past in its training set, but isn't exactly what we want. Maybe it's too wordy or something. And so the second stage of doing this kind of reinforcement learning allows us to move from saying, okay, this is what we expected you to get. So you've got the first half of War and Peace, and you can now make the second half of War and Peace, which is more just, did you correctly predict it? But instead saying, you gave this answer. Do we want you to give more answers like that or less answers like that? Are we basically going to reinforce, and that is almost, think about it as rewarding and punishing, the particular behaviors you did in there based on how the human auditors or how the human evaluators decided that answer went? So there is no kind of like ground truth, but there's preference. And this is where we kind of encode human preference about how the model behaves. And so this is currently being done by, for example, by OpenAI. So ChatGPT that you get, it is not whatever they got by just training it on the whole internet. It's what they did. And then they used their internal users who then gave feedback on the answers. And then that changed the way it behaved. And then they also take the information from the free users. So as a non-paying ChatGPT user, you'll firstly feed it what you're doing. And then if you use the thumbs up and thumbs down on the responses, you will give signals which changes how the model will answer in the future the next time it's trained. And all of these are always the next time it's trained. And I think we're starting to get the kind of slow, continuous integration of these things. But typically, we're not adding new information and we're not doing huge tweaks to the model's personalities once it's kind of locked in. And that's why the models have these kind of knowledge cutoffs and things, because we've got this period of giving it all the knowledge. And then once that's in, we then refine the behaviors afterwards.
Yeah. So would you say that let's call it post-training self-reinforcement learning comes from the thumbs up user? Is that really mostly where it's coming from?
Yeah, usually there are plenty of other options that is the kind of the clearest example when you're doing this kind of chat kind of setups. It can come in other forms, and especially as people start to train models for very specific use cases. So maybe a coding focused model, or maybe a model focusing on just being used inside a system. Maybe it's making loan decisions. That's when we can also start having more clear-cut signals of, yes, we want you to do more of that, or no, we want you to do less of that as part of this second training phase. But I think we're only just starting to find out how to do this in a way which doesn't trample all over the model. And I think the real early attempts to do this kind of fine tuning, usually it was a bit like a lobotomy. It was a real strong hammer applied to a quite delicate problem, because the models learned just so much information in the past, so much information you couldn't imagine how much it's consumed. The 100, 200,000, 100,000 examples you give it are just a drop in the ocean. So the initial way that we tried to do that was to really make those have a big impact. But the problem with doing that is that you're doing a very, very hardcore operations on it, which can really distort its output. So we've just started to find ways to do this kind of like fine tuning afterwards that still keeps the model intact and still giving good answers, but shapes its behavior in the way that we want it to go.
Or it's almost like leaving a review. Some people, they're just nice. Even if it's bad, they're like, oh, it's okay. It's good enough. Some people were like, oh, this is the worst response ever. Thumbs down, 5 thumbs down. And the other people were super optimistic, where it's like, this is a great answer, but it was like the worst answer. And so, the AI is dependent on a lot of people, and I feel like, but again, how does it know if it's a good answer? It's like the eye of the beholder. It's not, it's not what we say, it's what people hear. It's up to the user, it seems like, to have that sort of ownership on what is good and what is not. So let's go into one last question. So let's talk about the future developments that you anticipate in the field of AI agents? What do you think that is?
Yeah, so I think one thing that is really worth saying here is that I think true autonomy is few and far between right now. Nearly all places where you hear people talking about AI agents, they are either a kind of intelligent workflow, where we've had this kind of like system designer who has tried to think of all the eventualities, and the agent or the AI step is just one part of a more kind of normal deterministic, a standard computation process chain of events, or they're like co-pilot things where the AI is doing some things, but then coming back to the user, and then the users kind of pushing them off on the next task, and then they come back. So I think one of the big things we will see is these agents moving into being autonomous. And there's various things that are important there, but one of the things is that the longer an agent runs, the kind of bigger its conversation history is. Think about that's like how much it's keeping in its working memory. The longer that happens, the more agents start to kind of get a bit confused. And so an agent that is running for 7 days straight on the same task, unless we do some clever things to tell it, okay, you can forget that, that email that you opened on day one because it's probably not pertinent right now. These things cloud its mind until eventually it kind of runs out of steam. So I think we've got some stuff to do to make these agents better at running for a longer period of time. I think we're also going to see agents getting more and more fearless about really all sorts of different media being inputs to them. And that can be getting more and more text. What we've seen model context lengths, the amount of text that it can consume in a single go, increasing. But we've also started to see it getting better at media, starting off with images. We're starting to see sound and video. And those things will not have to be done by a separate model, but there'll be just a single model that can do all of these things. Most of the modern models that you might use from Gemini or from ChatGPT, they can already take in images in the same way they can take in text. So we've already kind of unified those two, at least in the full front models. And I think we'll probably include much more capabilities, bigger images, video files, and also just other data formats that upload PDFs and PowerPoint things, and the model will speak that just in the same way it can understand an image or a sound clip.
Michael, this has been great. I couldn't be more grateful to have you on the podcast. I think you bring a wealth of knowledge, and for the audience, we're going to drop something in the post that's going to include, how to reach, Stacker, and Michael will be tagged in that. But definitely check him out. I think what Michael's doing, what he's accomplished as an entrepreneur, is something that I want to do someday. So I got to admire his hustle and his achievement. But I think that if you came in looking to learn more about agents, I think you definitely got that here. So Michael, thanks again. Appreciate the time.
Thanks so much. It's been great.